Well, Dr. Koch and Kyle, it's always awesome to speak to the both of you. Thanks for joining the Disease Discussion podcast. And let's start with some background. First, Dr. Koch, I think a lot of people want to know this. How much of your time is spent studying and trying to find solutions for snow mold?
Oh, that's a good question, Guy. It might surprise some people, but we probably actually do more research on dollar spot and microdocium and disease predictive modeling and that sort of thing. But certainly, snow mold is a really important disease for our area and for a lot of superintendents. So we probably split, I would say roughly a third of our time towards snow mold, a third of our time to dollar spot, and a third of our time towards microbiome research. But love working on snow mold and love talking about snow mold too.
And that's why we're here. And I'm kind of wondering this. Where and how did you develop an interest in learning as much as humanly possible about such a specific disease like snow mold?
Yeah, it's kind of a nerdy thing, ain't it? Yeah. So we, again, it's an important disease for us, right? So there's a local aspect to it, right? If you're going to do turf disease work in Wisconsin and the Great Lakes, you need to have some knowledge on snow mold. But I think it's also a really interesting disease, right? So you get one shot to get it right, and I'm sure we'll talk about this more when we talk about control of snow mold. But really, you got one chance to get it right, and so there's sort of an importance to that snow mold application that's intriguing. Phil Davidson, he's the superintendent at the University of Wisconsin's golf course, University Ridge. And he has a great phrase that I like. He talks to our Turfgrass Apprenticeship Program students every year. And he says, snow mold is not my most important disease, but my snow mold application is my most important application, right? And I think that makes sense because let's say you have, you apply something for dollar spot or anthracnose or brown patch and something goes wrong. Well, you just go out and spray it again, right? I mean, not ideal, but not the end of the world. Snow mold, a lot of times you don't have that chance. So there's an importance aspect to that. And then, kind of getting onto the really nerdy side, the biology of the snow mold fungi, I think is really interesting. In the natural world, you can kind of succeed in two different ways, right? You can do something that really nobody else does, or you can do the same thing that everybody else does, but do it better, right? And with snow mold, you kind of have this niche, right? You're growing well at a temperature that not many other organisms grow well. So I think there's a lot of really interesting biology that goes on there. So all those things together kind of come forward into this, nerdy collection of why we do so much snow mold and why I find the darn thing so interesting.
And Kyle, let's bring you into the conversation now. What type of relationship do you and BASF have with snow mold? And it probably goes back further than we think.
Yeah, and I'm going to sit here and say that Dr. Koch introduced us to snow mold. Paul, I'm trying to think, how long have you been working on snow mold?
Oh, gosh. Well, how long have I been at UW? Since 2005 is when I took over the fungicide testing program. So we're this upcoming fall will be 20 years working with you guys on snow mold.
Yeah, and I joined the company in 2000, and shortly after that, we started looking at snow mold, but we've always looked to you all as the leaders in the research. And Guy, as far as a relationship goes with snow mold, I guess you could call it a love-hate relationship. We love trying to figure out how to provide solutions to our superintendents, but we hate how it can cause major damage on a golf course and wreak havoc for those same superintendents.
Kyle, in your mind, what makes snow mold an interesting disease to track and follow and help develop solutions for?
I just feel like from year to year, you never quite know what Mother Nature has in store for you. There's some level of unpredictability to this disease. Sometimes I see snow mold as similar to opening up a gift on your birthday. You're never quite sure of what might be inside that wrapping paper. And so for locations with a lot of snow mold pressure, as the snow starts melting, superintendents are wondering how much snow mold is going to be under that snow cover.
And this is for both of you, and we'll start with Kyle. Where and when can a golf course expect to encounter potential issues with snow mold?
Guy, I've seen it everywhere, to tell you the truth. Greens, tees, fairways, roughs. I mean, if you haven't put down any protection, you could see it a little bit of everywhere. However, as you might know, you're most concerned with the highly conditioned surfaces like greens and tees and maybe fairways. In most situations, the damage is evident when snow melt begins in the spring. So that's when we're going to look to see what's going on, how much damage we have, and did we do a good do a good job with that application that Paul talked about, you've got a one-shot deal on this.
Kyle framed it well. Where we tend to see the most snow mold is where you get snow early in the winter. And so when that snow falls in unfrozen ground, that's really where you see the intense snow mold. And then when that snow sticks throughout the winter, that's where you see the most. We talk about snow as sort of that traditional snow mold where you would make your fungicide application before the snow, you have snow all winter, and then it melts at the end of the year, and you do or you don't have snow mold. That's impacting a smaller and smaller area of the country as climate change is changing how our winters operate. Now we just see a whole lot of different swings during the winter. And that can have different impacts on snow mold. Certainly this year for a lot of our areas, we didn't see a lot of snow mold because we were incredibly dry. Had the driest January and February on record for Wisconsin. So if you are cold and dry and those soils freeze, you're just not going to see much in the way of snow mold. So really a lot of it, like Kyle said, it depends on the winter. You just never know what you're going to get. You can have fungicide programs perform well for years, and then out of the blue, you have a certain winter that just rocks it, and you get a ton of breakthrough. And, I'm guessing that's frustrating as hell for people like Kyle and his colleagues, where you got this program that looks like it's working great, and then all of a sudden you get whacked, and then we have to go back and Kyle and I and our teams to come together to try and figure out and explain to the superintendent what happened there. It's like I mentioned before, with a lot of those summer diseases, right, you kind of go back out and correct things, where with snow mold, though, you can't. And I also think our expectations maybe are a little harsh for snow mold fungicides, right? We want to get, in some areas, you want to get 6 months of control of snow mold from that app that you made in November 1st. You expect to get control all the way through winter into the spring. Could be 4 or 5, 6 months, depending on where you're at. We were just talking about the UP and how long the winters can be up there. Whereas, in a dollar spot, you're happy with 14, 21 days in a lot of cases. So we expect a lot out of our snow mold fungicides, and depending on the winter that we have, it can really wreak a lot of havoc.
Okay, Dr. Koch, we're ready for a classroom lesson here. What are the different types of snow mold that can emerge on a golf course, and what are the similarities and differences between those types of snow mold?
All right, good deal. Notebooks out. So we got there's 3 main types, right? There's 2 tiphulas. There's Typhula ishikariensis, which we commonly call speckled snow mold. There's Typhula incarnata, which we commonly call gray snow mold. A lot of people, and sometimes myself included, combine those together and call them both gray snow mold, but they're technically separate diseases. Typhula ishikariensis, that speckled snow mold, it's a slower growing fungus. It tends to need a long winter. It tends to need a long snow cover. So typically we only see that disease in sort of the northern Great Lakes, northern Northeast, Rocky Mountain West, where you really have, a solid 4, 5, 6 months of snow cover. Gray snow mold incarnata, that one requires snow cover. Both the typhulas require snow cover to cause disease. With incarnata, though, we'll oftentimes, you typically only need about 60 to 70 to 80 days to get disease with that, and that's a very generalized time frame. 2 winters ago, we saw gray snow mold with only about 21 days of snow cover in Madison, so that can really vary. So we see that one typically kind of in the southern Great Lakes, larger portions of New England. And then the third one is sort of the big one, and the one that's actually increasing in severity and increasing in how commonly we see it, and that's pink snow mold or Microdochium patch or Microdochium nabale. And the reason that one's increasing is that fungus grows faster, and so it can respond more easily to swings in winter conditions than the typhulas can. The typhulas are a slow-growing fungus. They grow they're kind of like a slow bulldozer. They're very destructive if you give them the right conditions for a long period of time to cause disease. But if you kind of take away that snow cover for a couple of weeks midwinter, they don't really respond well to that, whereas Microdochium can respond very well to these breaks. And so as we have these different kinds of winters, we're seeing sort of these less shorter durations of snow cover, and really we're starting to see predominance of Microdochium develop, even at our northern sites, right? We've been testing at Marquette for 15 plus years now. When we first started going there, we almost saw exclusively only speckled snow mold, ishikariensis. Now the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen predominantly Microdochium, pink snow mold up there. So as the weather conditions change, we see different types of snow mold occur.
Okay, I'm going to feel like the not-so-smart person in the back of the classroom asking you this question, but I'm really curious to hear your answer. Does it have to snow for snow mold to cause issues on a golf course?
Guy, there's no dumb questions, and that's a great question. With Tifula, it does. You need snow cover for Tifula. What the snow does is it insulates the surface. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but when we don't have snow, the surfaces get too cold and too dry for snow mold to occur. But when we do have snow, it insulates the turf. It keeps the soil temperature right around 32 degrees Fahrenheit or slightly above, and that relative humidity right around 60 to 80% or higher, depending on the kind of snow and how deep that snow cover is. And so if you think of a dark, cool, wet period, where do you grow mushrooms, right? Cool, dark, wet conditions, perfect environment for those snow molds to grow. So all three of the snow molds, the major snow molds, can grow under snow, can grow well. Only pink snow mold or microdocium patch can grow in the absence of snow. And so that one, if you look out in the Pacific Northwest, where Oregon State does a lot of great research, in Northern Europe and Scandinavia, pink snow mold or microdocium patch, in the absence of snow, is really one of their most important diseases all year round. So certainly, you do not need snow cover to get pink snow mold. And we've gotten samples up from as far south as Mississippi on Bermuda grass that has pink snow mold. So certainly, it can occur anywhere where it's cool and wet. But that's just the pink snow mold. The Tifulas do require snow cover to cause disease.
This is for both of you, and we'll start with Kyle on this one. What issues did snow mold cause during the winter of 2024-2025?
Yeah, and let me go back to what Paul just said, too. I've noticed that down south we've got pink snow mold, and I'm thinking, what in the world? But it's very symptomatic looking, very characteristic of what we know up north when we see it. But it's on warm season turf, and it just seems so strange to me that we talk about snow mold in the south, but it's very real and very much a problem. And I think probably even getting a little worse than it has been in past years. As far as this year, I'm going to say, and Paul, maybe you could share your thoughts too on this. I'm going to say snow mold pressure this year was maybe a 6 or a 7 out of 10, a little bit easier than some of the other years that I've seen it. And I'm fortunate enough that I do a lot of trial work from New England to the Midwest to even we've got researchers out on the West Coast. So I saw a lot, and I just felt like pressure was, I'm going to call it sort of moderate. Paul, would you agree with that?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think certainly for the Midwest, it was pretty low compared to normal. Up in Marquette this year, our trials averaged about 50% disease in the non-treated. Right. Normally, they're at about 100, right? So a pretty moderate year for pressure in the Midwest. And Marquette is normally, our kind of gold standard, really heavy pressure. If it performs well there, it performs well anywhere. Yep. Out east, they had more snow in parts of New England, so I think pressure was a little bit higher there. Other parts of the Great Lakes, I think, had some more snow mold pressure than sort of the western Great Lakes. We out here, we were just really dry. Pressure out west was, I think, decent in the mountains. They certainly have a lot of snow almost every year, and so I think the pressure out there was consistent with what we've seen in past years. Not exceptionally bad. Like it was, I want to say 2 winters ago. It was really nasty, but not absent by any means. So yeah, I would agree with that, Kyle.
Well, I tell you one thing too that we noticed was in a lot of areas we didn't have snow cover, but it was a cold winter, so we had a lot of desiccation damage out there that superintendents are trying to recover from right now.
Yeah, totally agree with that. We're seeing more in the way of desiccation than we are snow mold damage in our area. Now we're to this point, right? Is it dead, or is it just really, really slow? We had a meeting of the academics that are part of the USDA-funded winter turf group a few weeks ago, and kind of the term that we kept joking about is super dormancy, right? Is the turf dead, or is it just really, really dormant and really, really taking a long time to wake up? Cold spring, like we have a lot of times in the Great Lakes and Midwest area. So we're just now kind of starting to assess. And so a lot of those knobs, those exposed areas, are just taking a long time to grow out. Not snow mold. We didn't see a lot of snow mold damage, some isolated pockets of snow mold damage here and there. But yeah, it was dry, it was open, it was exposed. And so we saw a fair amount of very, very dormant, desiccated, injured turf at least. And whether, we're still trying to assess if we need to get seed in anywhere or if it's eventually going to wake up and recover. And I'm optimistic. I think most of it's going to come back, but we're still leery on some of these spots.
Kyle, what does the recovery process look like for a course that has suffered damage due to snow mold?
Well, I tell you what, back to our music theme, I think of the song by Guns N' Roses, Patience. Because a course with damage from snow mold, I mean, it may take a month or two for that turf to recover and get back to normal playing conditions. So that superintendent, there's not a whole lot they can do. Some cultural practices, obviously, to try to push it along a little bit, but it's not a quick process. Guy, as you know, down south, they deal with spring dead spot. Very deliberate, to have that turf recover. For us, it's snow mold.
I'll just add on top of that, right? It kind of depends on the turf that you have. If you have a bed POA mix, oftentimes you will be recovered within, again, depending on the conditions, 3 to 5 weeks, and depending on how bad the snow mold is. Right, and again, for us in the Great Lakes and the Midwest, it's it was a cold spring this year, and we tend to have a lot of cold springs lately. So it's going to take some time. Where it really takes time if you are mostly bent surface, right? Those bents, depending on the bent grass that you have, but pretty much all bents take a while to wake up and start growing. And typically, what's going to come into those damaged areas is annual bluegrass, right? So the one I like to say is, if you have a pure stand of bent, and you want to convert that stand of bent to a mixed bent POA stand, then get snow mold, because we've got great pictures of areas that were damaged by snow mold, and really what comes in and fills those areas in is annual bluegrass. So if you've already got a bunch of annual bluegrass out there, it's going to recover quicker than if it's straight bent. But when we I think 3 or 4 winters ago now in Madison, we had a lot of snow mold. And we just we did a time lapse. We just let one plot go that was really damaged with snow mold to see how long it would take. It took until almost July 1st, right, for it to completely 100% fill in. Now that's not, that's a little bit cheating because we didn't do anything to it. We didn't apply any nitrogen. We didn't verticut and rake it up or anything. Didn't put any seed in there. But still, it took until almost July 1st for those scars to fully heal in 100%, right? So that's, even if you're half that or a quarter that, right, at a time when people are itching to get outside and play some golf, if your course is one that's got a lot of damage out there and the course down the road doesn't have that kind of damage, where are the golfers going to play, right?
So, Dr. Koch, someone's listening to this and says, I absolutely do not want that to happen on his or her golf course. What are the basics a superintendent should understand when building that snow mold control program? What's the first step?
Like anything, right, there's back to those notebooks coming out, right? There's cultural and there's chemical practices, right? So when we talk about cultural practices, there's not a lot we're going to do with snow mold. The main one is fertility. That's the main aspect that's going to affect snow mold development. And we really want to have that nitrogen. We don't want to be putting nitrogen down late in the year. We want those turf plants to really be hardening off and not growing when that snow starts to fall, right? If you are pushing growth late in the fall or early winter, those plants can't harden off. And if the plants can't harden off, then they're not going to be fully prepared for the disease infection to occur. So really timing of that nitrogen application is really important. And that's really going to vary based on where you're at. But Doug Soldat, my colleague here at Wisconsin, he's done some work in sort of this Great Lakes area that we're in, kind of depending on where you're at. Typically by October 1st or the second part of September, you want to have most of your nitrogen out. You do not want to be pushing growth later than that. And if you're further south, you can probably push it a little bit later than that. But really, you want your nitrogen to be out and its impact on the plant finished by the time the snow is starting to fall. Potassium is another one, and there's some controversy on exactly the impacts that potassium has. So on bent grass, again, Doug Soldat has done potassium work for years now, and it's very clearly demonstrated that on creeping bent grass, adding potassium leads to more snow mold, and researchers in the past at Cornell have shown the same thing. Now, just to make things more complicated and show you that we can't have nice things, researchers at Rutgers have shown the exact opposite on annual bluegrass, right? So in annual bluegrass, they've shown that adding potassium actually leads to less pink snow mold. So kind of depending on the makeup of the turf that you have, if you've got primarily bent grass, I would say really drive down the potassium and apply as little potassium as possible. If you've got a mixed stand or predominantly annual bluegrass, you want to apply some potassium. One, it helps with anthracnose, but two, it's also going to help limit some of that pink snow mold development. So that's kind of the cultural side. Then from a chemical standpoint, work with your reps, look at the research that myself at Wisconsin and others have done, and a lot of it's posted online. Look at resources like chemical control of turf grass diseases or turf pest management mobile, and look at all these things together. Find a program that you can afford, that works for you. That's the products that are going to control the diseases that you have, the primary snow molds that you have at your golf course, and then time those appropriately, right? So that's a lot of very generic stuff right there, but I like to keep things generic because there's a lot of ways to succeed in snow mold. It's not just one single way to do it, and it's just kind of a framework for how you put it together and make something that works for your golf course.
Kyle, a golf course superintendent, has a lot going on. When should he or she start thinking about their snow mold control program? I mean, ideally you'd say every day of the year, but when is a time frame where somebody should really be locked in and thinking about snow mold control?
Well, I can tell you this. I go to the Wisconsin field day most years, and about a month after the field day, Paul sends out a message. It's time to be thinking about snow mold control trials. And I'm thinking, Paul, it's summer. It's summer. But anyway, the reason is simple, because you need to identify what your program is going to be, what products you need to have in your chemical storage room, and then you need to figure out, when am I going to calendarize that application? So it doesn't all happen very quickly. It pays to plan ahead. And so at the end of the day, we tell our folks sometime in late August, September, they need to be thinking about their snow mold program and what they need to pull that off.
Dr. Koch, what are you looking for when evaluating fungicides for snow mold control? And I know you run trials all over the place.
Yeah, we run a lot of trials, right? Reason we're running a lot of trials is because we want to make sure that the environment is going to be different in different locations in different winters. We want to be able to the more trials we put out, the better the chance we'll have to find one of those hot pockets that has a lot of snow mold that particular year. But we also want to test for different types of snow mold. So our different sites typically get different types of snow mold and at different levels of pressure, right? So we don't only want to have super, super high-end pressure that only applies to 2% of the golf courses in the country, right? We're going to have different levels of pressure, so you can kind of go in and look at a level of pressure that sort of corresponds to your golf course. You can kind of go in and say, well, this is, I don't have Marquette Golf Course, Craig Moore type of pressure at my golf course, but I might have, Wausau, central Wisconsin, that fits mine more. And so that's why we test at different sites. As far as what I'm looking for, obviously, right, we want to see disease control, right? How are these products performing? How are they controlling disease? And that is far and away number one, right? That's the biggest aspect. That's the thing we focus on in our work. I want to see them perform well over multiple years, over multiple locations, right? It's the product might just get lucky and have a good year for whatever reason, but we want to see those products perform well over 2 to 3 years, over 2 to 3 different locations before we start feeling comfortable recommending the use of those products to a broad audience. So I think that's a lot of what we look at, and then more recently there's sort of additional aspects that we don't necessarily rate or pay a tremendous amount of attention for, but superintendents ask about these things. So we've started to pay more attention to them recently. Some of them include pigments, right? So that's probably been the biggest shift in the 20 years I've been doing snow mold now. Was when I first started, there was no pigmented products out there basically. And now almost every snow mold has some sort of pigmented type or plant health benefit type product. And really we don't see any impact of the pigment on snow mold control. If you have a pigment in a crappy snow mold mixture, you're going to get green snow mold. A lot of superintendents really like having that kind of slightly that greener aspect coming out of winter, and it goes away pretty quickly within the first couple of mows, but it can provide at least a little aesthetic visual boost over other types of products. So I think those are some things. We're also starting to get more and more questions and thoughts about lower use rate products. There's a lot of stuff going on at that snow mold time of year, right? You're trying to close down the golf course. You're blowing out irrigation. Your staff's walking out the door on a daily basis. It's cold as hell. You want to get things wrapped up. You want to get out in the deer stand to hunt. ton of stuff going on. And if you got to just pour jug after jug after jug into these tanks to get your snow mold out there, it's just kind of one added hassle. So that's been one thing that we've had more and more conversations with is, and this is probably just in the past 2 or 3 years really, is a lot more questions about, what works and is a lower use rate, right? The classic really, really good snow mold product that's been used for decades and decades is chlorothalonil, right, Daconil, but it's a high use rate product. So we've had a lot of discussions with people about, what also works well and kind of provides some of the same benefits as DAC, but I don't have to pour all these jugs in at a time when I'm trying to wrap up a million other things in the golf course.
What are some proven practices for determining the best time to apply a fungicide for snow mold control? And I'm guessing you want to apply it when it's deer stand season, not ice fishing season.
Yeah, right. You want to be a little too early than a little too late. That's you never want to be too late and have snow on the ground. I mean, we've done a lot of work now. We've been working on actually developing. I talked about disease predictive models at the start. We've been working on a disease predictive model now since 2016 to kind of optimize snow mold fungicide timing. So this is a question we've spent a lot of time collecting data on and thinking about. And so, yeah, we're at 8 years now, just about, of working on this model, and we're field testing it. We're making great progress. The dollar spot model took us 10 years to build, and we're going to be at about 10 years with this model as well. But what we've learned from this work is that, one, for the most part, applying the closer your application is to final sort of dormancy or snow cover, the more effective it is. Now, having said that, you don't absolutely need to be 1 day before it snows. Typically, if you're within that, our data shows that if you're within kind of 2 to 3 weeks of your traditional sort of end of the year snowfall, then you're just as effective as if you were the day before. Now, there's some caveats there, right? If it rains right after you apply it, that's not good at all. But for the most part, if you're within that final 2 to 3 weeks, you're fine. You're as effective as you would be if you were like the day before it snowed. But in a lot of cases, we're also really what the model, I think, is going to show us, because for the most part, the model has showed us that the later you are before snow cover, the more effective it is. But what it's also determining is when you can start to make some earlier apps if you're in a high pressure area. That's one of the recommendations we make. If you're in a really high pressure area, you've seen breakthrough before, is to make an earlier app. Kind of the same concept as the early season dollar spot fungicide apps to knock down that initial inoculum. Well, we make those same recommendations in snow mold as well. However, the tricky part about the early season snow mold apps is you don't want to make them too early, because if you make them too early, the snow mold fungi haven't woken up, they haven't started growing yet, and they're not going to be impacted by the fungicide application you make. So I think really what the big benefit of this model will be is it's going to tell us when your snow mold fungicide applications will start working. Kind of, when does snow mold season start? If snow mold season is now open, you may go out and control disease. And so I think we've been working on that. And in general, that tends to be, 4 to 6 weeks or kind of 5 to 8 weeks prior to your final snow cover, that you kind of your big snow cover that sort of ends the season. But again, that can really shift from year to year. And kind of getting back to this climate change talk, one thing we've really noticed with climate change, at least in the Great Lakes area, is much warmer falls. We have really unhardened turf that hasn't really frozen off yet going into snow cover. And so that makes that kind of tricky.
If you had to pick a day, if you were making one snow mold application with all the work that you all have done, what would that day probably be, or close to?
Again, going to depend on where you're at. So I'll break that up into sort of like lower Great Lakes. I would say probably December 1st or late November, maybe right before Thanksgiving. If you're in central to northern Great Lakes, I would say probably November 1st. I think the first part of November, sure, I think would be good.
Are there instances where it might take multiple fungicide applications to effectively control snow mold?
We've also done a lot of work, right? We've done a lot of work at snow mold. And so one thing we've done quite a bit of research on is looking at how snow mold fungicides persist during the winter. And basically what we discovered is that they don't, right? They don't last the winter, right? If you get a rainfall event or a snow melt event, that is going to wash away. It's going to solubilize the fungicides and wash them away. That doesn't mean that those fungicides weren't effective. as long as the snow mold fungi were growing, it absorbs the fungicide and the fungicide kills it back. So in my opinion, and in my recommendation to, talking with Kyle and others and talking with superintendents, really the name of the game is knocking back the snow mold fungus as much as you can in the fall, because we can't do it during the winter, right? We can't get out there. Knock it back as much as you can during the fall and hope that it doesn't recover over the upcoming winter. So the more you knock it back in the fall, the lower the chance that it's going to recover to the point where it can cause disease over the winter. Because we just don't have products that persist during the winter anymore. Those older kind of heavy metal type products, they're not around anymore. And so a lot of times making a second earlier application kind of knocks back the initial inoculum, and then you come back 2, 3, 4 weeks later with your big heavy app, and that knocks it back even further. And in most cases, right, 90% of cases, that is enough injury to the snow mold fungus to prevent it from causing disease all year. Now, again, there's a lot of different things that can occur over the winter that can disrupt that and lead to disease, and that gets back to what we talked about earlier in the discussion today, that every winter is different, and it's why you can have a program that seems to work for 3, 4, 5 years in a row, and then out of nowhere you get hammered, and that's frustrating as hell.
Okay, so we have this problem, snow mold, and Kyle, you work for a company that's in the business of finding solutions to problems. What does the BASF team take into consideration when developing a new snow mold control solution such as Aramax intrinsic brand fungicide?
I think a couple of things sort of catch our fancy, and one is, and Paul alluded to this, was convenience. I mean, we want to get away from these high rates and having all these different jugs of products that we have to get rid of by putting everything, in a very concise container, and we have very few jugs to throw away, low use rates, easy to mix. That makes a lot of sense. And then the second thing, though, is, and probably more important, we need to make sure whatever products we're working on, that we attain a high level of efficacy. I mean, we want something that's going to control all the snow mold species, and a product with multiple active ingredients really helps do that because it's broader spectrum, and then it eliminates the need for additional products in the tank. So I think that those things are very important, and we've been testing with Aramax, we've been testing that tank mix, I think, Paul, since like 2010, if I'm not mistaken, and we just never actually pulled the trigger on it. And then finally we said, you know what, this product has a really nice fit. We can marry up these two active ingredients together, low use rates, and be very effective. And that's exactly what we've done, and we feel like we've got a proven solution for snow mold control.
Kyle, you just touched on it, but let's expand on it a little bit more. What type of testing was done on Aramax intrinsic brand fungicide before it was released to the golf market last year? And I'm sure one of the people that tested it is on this podcast right now.
Absolutely. I mean, we looked at it, east and west, up in the northern U.S., where, snow mold really plagues golf courses. We were looking at solo Aramax in a lot of trials, and then we also had trials where we included a tank mix partner to elevate the efficacy, where we had really tough snow mold in certain regions of the country. And in fact, with Aramax, we've actually got an assurance program that we term buildable snow mold protection. And this allows superintendents to add tank mix partners to Aramax as snow mold pressure increase. And we stand behind this program knowing that it can deliver excellent snow mold control for superintendents.
This is for both of you. What did you learn about Aramax intrinsic brand fungicide during the winter of 2024, 2025? Dr. Koch, when these products go out in the field, I'm sure you get a lot of feedback. And Kyle, I know you get a lot of feedback about them.
Yeah, I mean, like Kyle said, we've been looking at a mixture of triticonnazole and pyraclostrobin, what's in Aramax for a long time, and it's a mix that performs really well, right? So, like Kyle mentioned before, you want a product that's going to control different types of snow mold. Depending on the winter, you never know really what kind of snow mold you're going to get in advance, and so you want to have a mixture of different active ingredients that's going to perform well. And so we've looked at Aramax. Triticonnazole in particular is very strong on the Tiffilas, and so that's a great partner in there for Tiffilas. Pyraclostrobin has good efficacy on microdocium, then pig snow mold as well. And so those two married together, I think, are just a good team against snow mold. Kyle mentioned it as well, that sort of this buildable where you can add in additional tank mix partners. And if you're in an area, and Kyle and I have talked about this, if you're in an area that is really, really heavy pink snow mold pressure, then oftentimes we'll recommend adding in another partner, and which is not uncommon, right? When we look at snow mold, typically it's 3 or sometimes even 4 active ingredients mixed together that are really needed to provide excellent snow mold control in high pressure environments. And again, it gets back to that discussion of wanting to injure the fungus as much as possible in the fall. The reason I think those mixtures work better is they just injure the fungus more effectively than just 1 or 2 active ingredients. So Aramax has performed very well in our trials now. Again, like I said before, we want to see them in a number of years in a number of locations, and Aramax has performed well in our trials in a number of years in a number of locations. So feel very comfortable recommending that product for use.
Kyle, anything you want to add about what you and your team have learned about Aramax?
Yeah, when I looked at all my research from this past year, Aramax looked great. It really did. Like I said, and we talked about this earlier, the pressure wasn't the highest we've ever seen. However, it was very consistent across the board wherever I had it in New England, in the Midwest, out west. It really didn't matter. We talked about adding tank mix partners. This was one of those years it wasn't as important to have a tank mix partner in addition to Aramax in the tank. However, you want to be safer than sorry for sure, and so you're always protecting against Mother Nature and what she might bring at you. The other thing too about Aramax is we found out that superintendents also identified that it has a great fit in the spring and in the fall as a broad spectrum disease cleanup application. So excellent snow mold material, but they've also got an opportunity to use it in the spring of the year and then in the fall of the year as a cleanup.
Last thing here, and these are tough questions when we have to gaze into the future, but what does the future of snow mold control and some of the options out there look like in the Gulf market?
From a regulatory standpoint, right, we've seen a lot of products that are under review by the EPA that are really important in snow mold. Like iprodione is a big one, right? And I still haven't heard exactly what the latest is on what's going to happen with iprodione, but the initial proposal was for iprodione to be severely limited. Chlorothalonil has been reduced, the amount we can use there. So the number of products, especially sort of a lot of our old snow mold standbys, it's unclear how much we're going to be able to continue to use those for snow mold control. So that aspect, the regulatory part, is uncertain. So a lot is like these new products like Aramax and others that are coming to the market with sort of a snow mold focus, I think are really, really important. From an environmental standpoint, right, I've already mentioned multiple times that winters are changing, and certainly that will continue to happen. In some areas, in some winters, that means less snow mold, but really what we've seen is just less certainty, right? So if we're going to have warmer spells and more winter rainfall events in areas where we traditionally did not, what that just does is it leads to more rapid degradation of the snow mold fungicides and less protection for the plants. I think 10 years ago, I was under the impression that climate change will lead to less snow mold. Snow mold will be less of a problem. In certain areas, I think that probably has kind of areas that used to be on the fringe of snow mold. They probably don't see as much snow mold as maybe they used to 15, 20 years ago. But in areas that, traditionally have seen a lot of snow mold, they're not seeing less snow mold. It's becoming, in a lot of cases, more difficult to control snow mold because of the variable winter conditions, right? I think every superintendent in the North would agree that the ideal winter is you put your snow mold fungicide down, you get 8 inches of snow the next day, it sits there without any rain or any melts or anything until March 1st, and then it melts off in a week. Obviously, that never happens anymore. And so all these variable conditions that we see increase the uncertainty of snow mole control, and there's nothing that a superintendent hates more than uncertainty, especially during that winter when they can't really do a damn thing about it.
I like that, Paul. Yeah, I mean, it is just so unpredictable. I feel like snow mold is one of those diseases that is going to continue to give us problems. I feel like with certain diseases, like Paul, you had mentioned, like with dollar spot, I feel like we can get on a program and keep it under control. With snow mold, we just never know. I mean, we can feel like we're doing everything right, but Mother Nature is going to, do what she wants to do, and your application may be effective, it may not be. And I remember, too, you're talking about, climate change and people talking about global warming. And then, this year I felt like, wow, it was really, really cold. Where'd that come from, for a prolonged period of time? So it's just... I think we just never know. We're going to need to continue to work on some of these products, compounds, and try to put the best combination of products together to give us the best chance at doing a good job on snow mold.
Wow, this was a wonderful conversation. I felt like I was just in a short course about all things snow mold. Dr. Koch and Kyle, thank you so much for taking the time to share what you know with others. Congratulations on everything that you both have achieved and are continuing to achieve in this industry, and we're just grateful that we were able to have this conversation.
Thanks, Guy. Appreciate it.
Yep, good stuff, Guy. Thank you.